Now, from one theatre of conflict, let's now turn to another, the Malacca Strait, the battleground for a maritime competition between two regional powerhouses. No prizes for guessing as to which ones that I'm referring to. This is the contest between China and India. For the last 10 years, China has been trying to dominate this region. It has built ports. It has increased its naval presence. It's also tried to militarize small islands. Basically, Beijing wants to make its way through the Malacca Strait for a toehold into the Indian Ocean region, which is India's backyard. So New Delhi has now decided to give China a taste of its own medicine. Look at this report. India is now building a massive naval base, and it is doing it on the Great Nicobar Island. Now, this is a base that is being specifically built to keep a check on China's nefarious activities and to stop Beijing from stretching its neck further into the Indian Ocean. Now, for the unversed, the Great Nicobar Island is the southernmost and also the largest of all Nicobar Islands of India. It is located slightly north of Sumatra, barely 90 miles from the tip of Indonesia, overlooking the entrance of the Malacca Strait. The reports say that this base would become key to India's new oceanic strategy, a strategy to counterpunch China for its aggression along India's borders. So how exactly does India intend to do this? Let me explain. You see, the Indian Ocean is critical for China's energy security. Nearly about 80% of China's oil passes through this region, 80. They transit the sea lanes controlled by other states that also have to deal with the Chinese bullying, especially along the Malacca Strait. This narrow stretch of water connects the Andaman Sea with the South China Sea. It is one of the most important shipping lanes in the world. More than 100,000 vessels pass through it annually, and they account for an estimated 25% of the world's trade. And if we speak of China, almost 60% of China's trade flows through Malacca Strait. So the Malacca Strait is essentially where China, in fact, trades from. 60% of the Chinese trade goes through it. This is what powers the Chinese economy. Now, this makes this stretch a lifeline of sorts for the Chinese economy. So what does China do? It tries to militarize the area around the Malacca Strait so that it can dominate the passage of trade along this route. Now, Beijing, in fact, has come up with a rather unique and an interesting plan, and it's been there for at least a couple of decades. It calls it the string of pearls strategy. What China does as a part of string of pearls is to establish naval bases spread over the Indian Ocean region and beyond. These bases allow China to maintain contingents far from home. It allows China to station warships, control shipping routes, dictate trade routes, and not to mention spy on its adversaries such as India. This is where India's new naval base, in fact, comes into the picture. To start with, the Nicobar base could, of course, ensure freedom of navigation in this region. It could help countries to deal with China's perpetual bullying. Secondly, it could also be used to keep check on Chinese espionage, the numerous spy ships that traverse through this region. And thirdly, in case of a conflict, and this is what, remember, India is, of course, preparing for, it could also be used to cut off the vital shipping lanes for China. But for this to happen, other South Asian nations will also have to be on board. The question is, will they? And the answer is, why not? You see, despite the veneer of cordial ties, almost every nation in the Indian Ocean region has an ongoing dispute with the Chinese regime. If we speak of Malaysia, it has differences with China over the ownership of the Spratly Islands, and also over China's repeated incursions into Malaysian airspace and the repeated breaches of sovereignty into Malaysia's exclusive economic zone. In the case of Philippines, there is an ongoing fishing dispute that Philippines has with China. The Chinese vessels have repeatedly targeted Filipino boats. In the case of Vietnam, this is the same story that repeats. Hanoi and Beijing often clash over claims of sovereignty for several islands in the South China Sea. Now, but despite of these disputes, most of these countries have tried to maintain cordial ties with China, and that's because they don't have a choice. They lack both the means and the clout to counter China's might. And this makes India a major nation that can, of course, counterpunch China in the region. It has a professional armed force that can, of course, take on the Chinese and an equally a huge economic clout. And it can hit China where it hurts the most. A new naval base at the Great Nicobar Island checkmates the Chinese ambitions to creep into the Indian Ocean. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.